cellular agriculture is using cell culture to produce agricultural products. And the frustration that I've had over the last 3 or 4 years is that everything that is considered cellular agriculture is actually synonymous with cultivated meat. And there's so much more to cellular agriculture than just meat. I really want, through this venue, as well as other venues, we really need to drive home the message that cellular agriculture includes any type of cell culture products that can be derived from animal cells, like cultivated meat, plant cells, like cocoa, or precision fermentation with microbial cells. And that broader definition of cellular agriculture is important to me because I see there is a resistance from consumers to adopt or try cultivated meat.
Imagine a world where your favorite chocolate bar doesn't require a single cacao tree, where coffee comes from a bioreactor, not a plantation. Sounds like science fiction? It's happening right now in California. Today we're joined by Steven Lang, who is the head of R&D at California Cultured, who left 2 decades in biopharma to revolutionize how we produce food. He's cultivating plant cells to create real cacao and coffee. No farms, no deforestation, no compromise on flavor. Let's explore the future of what we eat. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brohlman, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. Welcome back, Steven, to the Smart Biotech Scientist. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
It's great to see you again, David. I'm really pleased to have this conversation again and catch up.
Sure. Steve, share something that you believe about bioprocess development that most people disagree with.
Interesting. Well, since we talked last, the thing that I've really come to learn is that we need to walk before we can run. And that is not necessarily around bioprocessing development per se, but it's more on the biotech industry and how we have to have stage appropriate models to really kind of push this industry forward. And we can get into more of those details, but that's the kind of a nutshell of what I think is that we need to really kind of look at simpler models that can help us answer some of these fundamental questions, not only on the technical side, but also the consumer acceptance side.
I like that. Learn to walk before you run.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm excited to have this conversation today on cellular agriculture. Let's start with you, because not everyone listened to our first conversation. So I'd love to hear your origin story. What sparked your interest in biotech, and what were some pivotal moments? Because a lot of things happened actually since we last spoke.
So my origin story, we kind of went into in the last podcast. So I'd recommend listeners go back and listen to that one. But just in a synopsis, I've got almost 20 years of experience in biopharmaceutical with large, mature pharmaceutical companies, Johnson Johnson and Genentech, as well as small CROs. But then 4 years ago, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different outside of the pharmaceutical arena. And the opportunity came along to work on cultured meat, which just blew my mind because using these expensive bioprocessing processes to produce a commodity just doesn't make any sense. So, and as we spoke about it back in 2023, that's really motivating. That's really exciting for intelligent people to have huge, audacious challenges to take on. And certainly cultivated meat presented that to me, and that's what got me interested in it. You know that throughout the biotech industry, there's been a lot of retraction, more consolidation, especially in the food sector, which is a little bit more competitive than the pharmaceutical sector. Maybe not competitive, but cost conscious is what I would say. What I was caught up into is part of that. And I was laid off from Upside Foods as part of one of their reduction in force as they were consolidating their resources to extend their runway. I thought that was a little bit short-sighted, but I didn't make any decisions. So I took about 8 months off of work and really did some introspection on what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. And that brought me to the point where I wanted to have a larger impact on the world beyond just human health. And that's where this opportunity came along to join California Culture. I really thought about it deeply. And as we talk further, I hope to elaborate that this cell culture technology that we're working on today can really have an impact on human health, food security, and sustainability. And all of those things are really near and dear my heart. So having the opportunity to really work on something that can have that type of huge impact, have a global impact, was really compelling for me. So I made the jump without much hesitation into California Cultured, where we're producing cultured chocolate or cocoa powder to begin with, as well as then coffee. And those are the first products that we're going to be getting out the door. And this is a relatively small startup, 18, 19 people right now. That was started in 2020. And we're building out not only plant cell culture products, but also the supporting biomanufacturing process. So we're actually developing new bioreactors for these plant cells, which is fascinating work as well.
Yeah, I love to dive into more. It's fascinating. And I must say, I'm a bit biased as a Swiss. I love chocolate. And I've asked some critical questions.
Perfect. I'm ready for them.
Let's unpack it from the start, because we have heard, or some of you listening have heard, the term cellular agriculture. But even to me, sometimes it's not clear what is exactly in that field. It's also evolving. So I would love to hear your definition. What is inside? Is even cultivated meat inside of that, or is it outside? Or tell us more.
No, that's great. Really good question, because I think this definition has been evolving, and it's important for us as an industry to consolidate around a single definition. And I think that definition should be cellular agriculture is using cell culture to produce agricultural products. And the frustration that I've had over the last 3 or 4 years is that everything that is considered cellular agriculture is actually synonymous with cultivated meat. And there's so much more to cellular agriculture than just meat. I'd like to also argue that the focus on cultivated meat has done us a disservice because we have had some opposition to cultivated meat. Political arena, political grandstanding, where states and even countries have banned lab-grown meat even before that's available on the market. So I really want, through this venue, as well as other venues, we really need to drive home the message that cellular agriculture includes any type of cell culture products that can be derived from animal cells like cultivated meat, plant cells like cocoa, or precision fermentation with microbial cells. And that broader definition of cellular agriculture is important to me because I see there is a resistance from consumers to adopt or try cultivated meat. So we need to get away from the focus on cultivated meat and more onto these other products that maybe consumers will understand better as well as adopt easier.
When you say precision fermentation is part of cellular agriculture, what comes to my mind, and this is a question, is beer production part of cellular agriculture or not?
You could, but it's traditionally been called fermentation, which is, again, as a stretch, you could call that precision fermentation.
Okay, fair enough.
I think of precision fermentation as really using genetically modified microbes to produce a product, whereas beer and wine fermentation essentially producing alcohol, which is important, but it's not as complicated as, say, producing lactoferrin from yeast.
Let's walk through the fundamentals of what you're doing. You're now growing cocoa cells in a bioreactor. Tell us more. How does this work? Is it similar to a CHO cell culture? Is it very different? And more.
I like to say cell culture is cell culture. What we do in plant cell culture is very analogous to a CHO cell in cell line development or any type of cultured meat, where essentially we take a biopsy from the agricultural plant or animal, and we immortalize those cells and then expand them to produce biomass that is the product. So there's no differences there. The differences are really about the terminology. With plants, what we do is we take an explant instead of a biopsy. And plants are interesting because all of their cells are totipotent. So they can be differentiated into a full plant from any individual cell. And so what we've done here at California Cultured is with our cell line development group, we've taken explants from a cacao pod where we aseptically open up the pod and expose the beans inside the pod, and it will take biopsies from those beans. And those biopsies or explants are then put on the solid plate agar media and induced to dedifferentiate. And those are called callus cells. And this technology has been around for actually longer than a lot of cell culture because this technology was used to propagate plants for the field. And so it's interesting because we can take those callus cells that we have on the plate and really use that as a cell bank and then screen and select the cell lines that we want from those and adapt them to suspension culture, much like you would do with an animal cell, and then scale them up. And from there, once we go into scaled production, it's a very simple process. Very much like cell culture, we're controlling the environment of the culture and then running for a certain amount of days. And then we crack the bioreactor open. The one big difference about plant cell culture products that we're working on is that there's relatively very little downstream processing. So our downstream processing is dewatering, drying, milling, and packaging. Compare that to then, and this is maybe an important comparison, compare that to cultivated meat, where you're taking all the biomass from the bioreactor, and then you have extensive downstream processing, such as putting it on a scaffolding or some sort of maturation, or formulating it with protein or plant-based protein to create that meat facsimile. So with our plant cell culture products, we have very simple downstream processing, and that I think is going to alleviate some of the concerns from the consumers about cellular agriculture products because it's easier to understand. And also the products coming out of the bioreactor for plant cells are really kind of look like conventional cocoa powder or coffee. So it's easy for consumers, in my mind, to connect the product that we're producing with what they traditionally think of as cocoa powder and coffee.
Regarding consumer acceptance, I think this cocoa product is much easier to sell because it's not a genetically modified cell, correct?
Before we continue, biotech founders, I want to talk directly to you. Do you know that feeling when an investor asks about your manufacturing strategy and you freeze? One wrong CMC decision can cost you $2 million and 18 plus months of delays. Yet many CEOs are flying blind on these critical decisions. That's why I created the 1-week CMC strategy assessment. In 1 week, you get a personalized assessment of your molecule and development stage. We identify critical gaps before they become million-dollar mistakes, plus a strategic roadmap for high-stakes investor meetings. One CEO told me, "David took me from feeling powerless about our CMC roadmap to confidently pitching investors. An absolute game changer for time-pressed CEOs." Whether you are preparing for Series A, approaching IND filing, or facing scale-up challenges, this gives you confidence to ace investor and board conversations instead of surviving them. Ready to stop second-guessing your CMC strategy? Check the link in the show notes and secure your spot. Because your breakthrough therapy deserves a solid CMC strategy. Now, let's get back to our episode.
Correct. So we have not done any genetic modifications to our cell lines and our products. We're relying on the natural diversity in the genetics and the epigenetics of cacao to pull out the cell lines that we're interested in, and then have the phenotypes, not only the growth parameters, but then the phenotypes that we're most interested in, which is essentially the sensory attributes, as well as at higher levels of the bioactives that are important in cacao and cocoa powder.
Do you clone the cell or your cell lines as you would do in cell culture?
Not necessarily. Since we're not doing any genetic modifications, we don't have to then ensure that our product is coming from a single cell, much like what the FDA requires of biopharmaceuticals. Essentially, we do clone, but these cells aggregate quite a lot. So it's hard to say whether or not we have a single cell or an aggregate of cells that is producing our product. But we have strict quality control processes and specifications that we meet in order to make sure that we're producing a safe and high quality product.
And how do you manage the variability that comes from different cells? I imagine the taste will change, maybe the texture.
There's not a lot of that. So right now, what we're finding is that if you control the environment very carefully for plant cells, you can control the consistency and the quality of the product coming out. So we have been sticking with a very straightforward media, and our processes, and we'll talk more about the bioreactors themselves, are pretty consistent. And that gives us stable production over time. What we're hoping to do is that we've demonstrated that we get stability over 6 months or so at the lab scale. And now when we go to full scale, we're hoping to translate that stability into a continuous manufacturing process.
I'm curious about the media cost because that's a big challenge in the cultivated meat space. How does that work in cacao?
So plants in a field, they just need fertilizer. And since we're growing them without sunlight, they need a carbon source. In our media, it's a relatively simple media, only about 18 different components, compared to an animal media or an animal cell culture media where it's 40 to 60 components. And some of those are expensive growth factors. Our components are typically fertilizers, phosphorus, nitrogen, and then a carbon source, and some relatively cheap or inexpensive growth factors that's found in conventional food that we eat today.
All of the components you're using are chemically defined, correct?
Correct. So chemically defined media, and I should also say that all the components we're using have been gone through a GRAS process or generally recognized as safe and totally acceptable for food production. In addition to the fewer raw materials that are going on, the costs are dramatically different. Back in the day when I was doing cell line development at J&J, we were paying $40 a liter for media. I don't know that prices have changed a lot, but here at the plant cell culture, we're well below $10 a liter, and we're going to get below $1 a liter.
Wow. And what is the cost, or I'd say the financials? Is it very easy to get to a spot where you will be able to produce a product that's profitable?
Yes, absolutely. And I should back up and say that our first product coming out the door, let me describe that, is the high-flavanol cocoa powder. So we've selected a cell line that produces higher levels of flavanol, and flavanol is a bioactive compound that's responsible for making dark chocolate healthy. So there's a very large clinical study that was done called the Cosmos trial that incorporated more than 21,000 participants, mostly elderly people, and more than half of them had pre-existing conditions such as cardiovascular issues or diabetes. And this is a very long-term study that was looking at supplementing their diet with 500 milligrams of flavanol per day and found a 27% reduction in cardiovascular events. And further additional studies still coming out from this, or there's additional work coming out from this study. So we're interested in how can we take and improve not only the flavor and taste, but also the health benefits of cocoa powder. And through our cell line, we think that we can do that by going into a market where we're asking a premium price for this high flavanol cocoa powder. And while we're working on that and scaling that up and selling that product, we're going to be continuously working on improving the COGS and the processes so that we reduce our cost and then start selling commodity cocoa, which is a much lower price point. So we're going to start with a premium product. We use all of that energy to move into commodity products like coffee and conventional cocoa powder.
Yeah, that's an excellent strategy.
Yeah. Other companies are doing that. I'd like to point out Gourmet, who's been very successful in France, producing foie gras as premium product for cultivated meat. It really is the way to go. It's more of the Tesla model where you put out a premium product first.
Yes, exactly. It's a Tesla model.
Exactly.
Before we go on to the flavor, I just want to dive into the bioreactor side for a minute because not everyone listening is familiar with plant cell culture. Can you describe how the bioreactor looks? What are the parameters you're controlling? How does a run typically run? Is it a batch? Is it a fed batch? You mentioned continuous. How does it work?
What we are doing with these cacao cell lines and our cocoa powder product, essentially we've run these cells in both stirred tank bioreactors as well as airlift bioreactors. They are very robust and grow in various situations, and we don't have to control very much. So one of your previous podcasts, you were talking about process analytical techniques, or PAT. And for us, the only thing that we do is we control dissolved oxygen. These plant cells grow at ambient temperatures, relatively low pH, and all they need is oxygen and a media source. They're relatively simple. It's not to say that the processes are simple, but they're flexible and we can use different modalities. So currently we're running batches, not fed batch. And a typical bioreactor will start with inoculation and then 7 days later we'll harvest. We go in with a higher inoculum than typical, but also our cells are larger. So we'll start with a 5 to 10 packed cell volume or 5 to 10% packed cell volume for inoculum. And then when we harvest, it's more like 30 to 40% packed cell volume. And that yield is dramatically different than what you're able to get from a highly optimized animal cell culture process. So just to start with, the amount of biomass we're able to get from a plant cell culture is dramatically higher than what animal cells can produce.
And how long does a run typically last for?
7 days. But the seed train running up to that is your typical 4 to 5 day split ratio. And depending on the scale that you're going up to, you'll require that time to get inoculum ready into the final production vessel.
And what vessels are you using in the seed train? Are these shake flasks, spin tubes, the usual suspects?
All the standard stuff, shakers and shake flask, fern block, the big shakers, until we get into the bioreactors. So at very small scale, beginning at 5 and 10 liters, we'll put them in a controlled environment. And then we'll just scale from 5 to 10 liters to 100 liters, 500, and then 2,000.
How critical are these cultures with respect to contamination, for instance?
The major problem with any scaling of cell culture is going to be contamination. How do you provide a sterile envelope for these cells to really kind of take off? The nice thing about plant cells, and I mentioned this earlier, is that the culture media is relatively low pH, and that is not conducive to microbial growth, as well as then the plant cells themselves produce antimicrobial components that fend off contamination. Now, we've got all that going for us, but we still suffer from contamination, and that is one thing that we're working through. And as we talk about some of the innovations that we're working on with our bioreactors to create low CapEx, low OpEx bioreactors, the sterilization process is a big part of that.
And you're using stainless steel tanks for the cell culture. It's not single use, right?
We're not single use and we're not stainless steel. Because we're going after commodities, I think one of the things that really attracted me to this company is that they had really thought about their business model and really understood that they're going after commodities, so everything has to be interrogated for reducing the cost. And so right now, we're working with plastic bioreactors. And the reason why we're working with plastic bioreactors is because we can buy a 2,000-liter tank for about $3,000 US. You try to buy a stainless steel 2,000-liter bioreactor for less than $1 million. Just right there, you can see that we're taking a different approach here and maybe recreating the wheel in some situations. But at the same time, I think our cells are posed to work into these low-cost bioreactors that we can then scale out very easily. And then the other thing about the business model is that because we're looking at scaling out from 2,000 liters rather than scaling up, we want to convert underutilized office space into labs where we can produce cocoa and coffee. And this is fantastic because what we're paying for here in West Sacramento, where all my labs are, is an underutilized office space. And the square foot price for that real estate is very, very cheap compared to what you would have to pay for a GMP lab or a facility where you could do large-scale cell culture with animal cells.
Yeah, that's interesting because this model could also be, and we're going to get there to the greater impact, but this could be a very interesting model for an emerging market. You put this somewhere in Africa or in Asia, in Southeast Asia, I mean, that works, and people have the competences to run that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you really brought that up because we can not only co-localize these bioreactors because they're so cheap, but that means that we can onshore production of products that normally we've not been producing in Europe or United States. Particularly, I'm talking about coffee and cocoa, which is very restricted to areas around the equator. And here in the United States, the only place that we can grow cocoa or coffee is really in Puerto Rico and Hawaii. And that's not enough. So that's exactly our vision is we're looking to build out not only the cell lines, but also the processes and the infrastructure that'll allow us to really essentially build these plants anywhere in the world, co-localized with then, say, chocolatiers right next to their facilities, and also produce more biomanufacturing jobs. All of those things are going for us and are what I think of as positive externalities by really focusing in on how can we create low CapEx, low OpEx biomanufacturing for products that people really want. And people are addicted to chocolate and coffee.
Yeah, and I think it's just the beginning because you can produce all kinds of products in these cell culture systems.
Yeah, I mean, there's already about precedents. I mean, plant cell culture has set a lot of precedents, but there's drugs that are being produced, at least 4 that I know, being produced from plant cell culture. There are animal vaccines being produced, as well as then all kinds of supplements and cosmetic components, other ingredients being produced from plant cell culture.
That's just the beginning of our conversation with Steven Lang. We've explored the foundations of cellular agriculture and the bioprocessing challenges of growing cacao in bioreactors. In part 2, we'll dive into the economics, the scalability, and what this means for the future of food production. If you're finding value in this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform. It helps other biotech scientists like you discover these conversations. We'll see you in part 2. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.